Good morning and welcome to BHF Radio on this Saturday, the 10th of July. I'm Bhavini Makwana, and with me, as always, I have
Paresh. How are you all?
Yeah, how are you? A few of you messaged following last week's show where Paresh took over and was sharing some fascinating facts, and you really enjoyed them. So thank you for messaging. And previously, where we shared, I think a couple of shows back, where we were talking about different cleaning tips and hacks and using products that you may already have in the household. So to avoid chemicals and just using natural products that you may, just mixing a few things up, which does the trick as amazing as, well, the things that you can buy in the shop. So thank you for feedback, and we'll certainly do more of those if that's of interest to the listeners. So I hope you've all been listening to Hiran and Maya Ben, another wonderful bhajan hour. So thank you to them. And welcome to today's show. So I'm going to try my best not to mention the football because it's all what people are talking about at the moment. So we are talking to our lovely guest who will be joining us shortly, Dipti Solanki, who is a grief coach amongst many other titles and hats that she wears. And we are talking about grief. You may remember a few weeks ago we were going to have Dipti on our show, but sadly we postponed, and it is today. So we'll be sharing what is grief coaching, how to manage and deal with grief, and in particular tips for children. And it's a topic we don't talk about often enough, especially in our communities. So before we bring Dipti on, we're going to listen to our first song, which is the well-known bhajan Kabhi Pyas Aaye.
कभी प्यासे को पानी पिलाया नहीं, बाद अमृत पिलाने से क्या फायदा। कभी गिरते हुए को उठाया नहीं, बाद आंसू बहाने से क्या फायदा। कभी माँ बाप की सेवा की ही नहीं, सिर्फ पूजा के करने से क्या फायदा। कभी प्यासे को पानी पिलाया नहीं, बाद अमृत पिलाने से क्या फायदा। कभी भूखे को भोजन खिलाया नहीं, दान लाखों का करने से क्या फायदा। कभी प्यासे को पानी पिलाया नहीं, बाद अमृत पिलाने से क्या फायदा। गंगा नहाने हरिद्वार काशी गई, गंगा नहाते ही मन में ख्याल आ गया। गंगा नहाने हरिद्वार काशी गई, गंगा नहाते ही मन में ख्याल आ गया। तन को धोया मगर मन को धोया नहीं, फिर गंगा नहाने से क्या फायदा। कभी प्यासे को पानी पिलाया नहीं, बाद अमृत पिलाने से क्या फायदा। मैंने वेद पढ़े, मैंने शास्त्र पढ़े, शास्त्र पढ़ते हुए ये ख्याल आ गया। मैंने वेद पढ़े, मैंने शास्त्र पढ़े, शास्त्र पढ़ते हुए ये ख्याल आ गया। मैंने ज्ञान किसी को बांटा नहीं, फिर ज्ञानी कहलाने से क्या फायदा। कभी प्यासे को पानी पिलाया नहीं, बाद अमृत पिलाने से क्या फायदा। माँ पिता के ही चरणों में चारों धाम है, आजा आजा यही मुक्ति का धाम है। माँ पिता के ही चरणों में चारों धाम है, आजा आजा यही मुक्ति का धाम है। पिता माता की सेवा की ही नहीं, फिर तीर्थों में जाने से क्या फायदा। कभी प्यासे को पानी पिलाया नहीं, बाद अमृत पिलाने से क्या फायदा। कभी गिरते हुए को उठाया नहीं, बाद आंसू बहाने से क्या फायदा। बाद आंसू बहाने से क्या फायदा। बाद आंसू बहाने से क्या फायदा।
You're listening to me, Bhavini Makwana, on BHF Radio on this Saturday, the 10th of July. So I mentioned we'll be joined by our guest Dipti Solanki, and we are talking about the topic of grief. and Dipti has joined us. So without further ado, let's bring her on. Good morning, Dipti. How are you?
Good morning, Bhavini. I'm so well. Thank you so much for having me on. How are you?
Yeah, not bad, thank you. Thanks for asking. So before we get started and talking about the topic of today, can you introduce yourself for our listeners?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Dipti Solanki, and I am a grief coach and a natural health practitioner. What I do is I help people transition through all different types of loss, and so that they can navigate that heartbreak, that pain, and the destruction that grief causes in people's lives, so that they can transform and evolve through grief and not become stuck in it and become sick, basically, emotionally or physically.
Yeah, and just to sort of take it right to the beginning, like we say the word grief, but what do we mean by the word grief? Like, what is grief?
Yeah, great question. So essentially, this is the way that I see grief. Grief can rise from so many different things, but essentially what happens is something very fundamental changes in our life. So anything, a very familiar pattern of behavior, something that we are used to suddenly changes. And, research has shown there's over 70 different types of losses. So 70 different events can happen, probably even more, in our life. And that can bring on so much change. And that change can bring on feelings of grief. So grief can be heartbreak, it can be loss, it can be so much sadness, but also loss can come on after good things happen in our life as well. So grief can rise from so many different events. That's the way that I understand grief.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on it slightly. So grief is not just associated with death, and I think we've spoken about this many years ago. Like, I only realized after about, say, I don't know, 20 years after that I was experiencing sight loss, that I was actually grieving for my sight that I had lost, and I didn't even realize that until 20 years after my diagnosis. So grief can affect many things, like you said, organ failure, perhaps, loss of a limb, in my case sight. I mean, can you share sort of examples, who else and how else grief can be experienced?
Yeah, 100%. So the types of losses can happen. We'll immediately think of death or bereavement, and then grief is associated with that. But grief can rise if you experience a breakup in a relationship, a divorce, even when family members fall out and there's estrangement and you're not seeing your friends or family anymore. Health losses, as you said. So any kind of, a long-term diagnosis, a loss of a limb, even if you suddenly have to take long-term medication and be dependent on someone else for many normal functions of daily life that you would kind of do on your own. Grief can come about when someone betrays you. Grief can come about through financial loss. Grief can come about through miscarriage, through infertility. It can come about when, you don't do as well at school, for children especially. You're expecting to pass certain exams because you want to go on to do something in your career, and that doesn't happen. There are so many varied different types of losses that we can experience.
Yeah, and just thinking about the last sort of 12 to 18 months, like the loss of independence, the loss of jobs that we keep hearing, the loss of just visiting family and friends, like coming to independence. So yeah, exactly. I think we kind of glance over the fact that grief can be caused by many different things, and I guess in that way then grief can be experienced by any age, people of any age then.
Yeah, 100%. I think the last 18 to 19 months have been an incredible example of things suddenly changing. The world as we knew it on every single level suddenly changed. And this meant that so many people experienced losses, so many people. down from children to even pets to, everybody, adults, everyone alike experienced some kind of collective loss. And as a result of that, so many health issues rose as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite fascinating. I mean, I really want to touch up on the fact that, if people listening out there can kind of relate, but not 100% sure that if they're experiencing grief, we'll touch upon some typical kind of signs, or maybe not so obvious signs of someone who may be grieving. But before we do, let's play our next track from the film Hero.
पन्नों पर अपनी तकदीर तो जीरो है ओ,
तू मेरा जानू है, तू मेरा दिलबर है, मेरी प्रेम कहानी का तू हीरो है।
पर प्रेम ग्रंथ के पन्नों पर अपनी तकदीर तो जीरो है ओ, किसी को ये प्यार नसीब होता है, किसी किसी को ये प्यार नसीब होता है।
देखी दुनिया से दुनिया होती है, दिल करीब होता है।
कोई कोई ऐसा खुश नसीब होता है, कोई कोई ऐसा खुश नसीब होता है।
तेरी बातें तू ही जाने, मैं तो बस इतना जानूं, 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 जानूं। तू मेरा जानू है, तू मेरा दिलबर है, मेरी प्रेम कहानी का तू हीरो है।
पर प्रेम ग्रंथ के पन्नों पर अपनी तकदीर तो जीरो है ओ, अब किससे हैं पुराने, मैं तो बस इतना जानूं कि प्रेम ग्रंथ के पन्नों पर अपनी तकदीर तो जीरो है हो।
कि प्रेम ग्रंथ के पन्नों पर तू मेरा हीरो है ओ। इतना काफी है तू मुझे प्यार करता है, इकरार करता है।
याद तुझे एक पल में दिल सौ बार करता है।
देखे कौन जुदा हमको दिलदार करता है, इनकार करता है।
प्यार कहाँ लोगों का इंतजार करता है।
तेरी बातें तू ही जाने, मैं तो बस इतना जानूं, जानूं, जान 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 जान।
मैं तेरा जानू हूँ, तू मेरी दिलबर है। मैं तेरा जानू हूँ, तू मेरी दिलबर है।
और प्रेम ग्रंथ के पन्नों पर तू मेरा हीरो है ओ।
मैं तेरा जानू हूँ, तू मेरी दिलबर है। मैं तेरा जानू हूँ, तू मेरी दिलबर है। मैं तेरा जानू हूँ, तू मेरी दिलबर है।
Hi everyone, this is Navin Kundra and you're listening to the one and only Bhavini Makwana here on BHF Radio. This is the best Saturday morning show on the planet, so keep it locked.
And that was Mere Tera Hero here from the film Hero. We are joined by our guest today, Dipti Solanki, and we're talking about grief and what is grief? You know, what are the signs and symptoms of grieving and what can it be associated with? So we're going to bring Dipti back on, and I just wanted to sort of find out and just sort of learn and what could kind of be the most typical obvious signs of someone who may be grieving, but also not the most obvious ones.
I think that's a great question, because in the immediate aftermath of a very obvious grief event, so after a bereavement, whether it's baby loss, anyone else, we will have those intense feelings of sadness, of feeling low, of heartbreak, and they're the most kind of obvious signs. But when we don't recognize that we've even experienced a loss, and we've just discussed how many different types of losses there's a whole host of symptoms actually that we can look out for. And people normally can just put these down to, I'm just feeling low, or I'm not quite right, but I don't know what I'm experiencing. So there's quite a list of them, but let me try and go through some of them. So one of the things is that you might find that you're just not able to be present. You can't enjoy anything that you're doing, or you can't concentrate very well. So you might find that you're thinking a lot about things that have happened in the past, either the recent past or many years ago. And when you do think about them, you can be overwhelmed with the intense feelings that you felt back then. You could find that you're experiencing lots of intense anger or rage, or even irritation about really, really minor things. And, your reactions are really out of proportion to the situation. And it can even take you by surprise, let alone anybody else. Another thing is that you can't focus on your own stuff, on your own life. You might find that you're constantly distracting yourself, either with drama with other people's lives, or, trying to fix other people, but you don't look at your own stuff, which is a really big sign that I see in people, actually. You may feel that you have lots of regret after these intense reactions. Another thing is isolation. We might find that we don't feel like being with other people. We don't feel like going to events. Not that there have been many events recently, but in no way, shape or form do you want to interact with other people or the outside world. And you might find yourself isolating, cutting yourself off. You could, anxiety. Now, anxiety is a really, really big one. I know that so many people now are just given the diagnosis of, I'm just an anxious person, you suffer with anxiety. But 99.9% of the time, that anxiety is being felt because of something, because of an event. It's normally linked to something. Because you have unresolved emotion that sits underneath it, you will experience the anxiety and the depression. Being fearful about really small things, having a feeling of dread when you wake up in the morning, just not knowing why you feel that way. But that's because, your subconscious processes a lot during the night. Being overwhelmed. So you can start to feel really overwhelmed by even the smallest of tasks. And I hear this all the time when I work with people. It's like, things that I normally find really easy to do, I can't do anymore. Feeling lots of guilt and regret, sleep issues. And another big one is like, just feeling as if like you're just going through the motions in life now, and you can't really experience real joy or excitement or any emotions, actually. You just feel quite numb. So, and I think the biggest one is trying to distract ourselves. So, doing things in excess, like making sure you keep busy, or cleaning, with exercising, playing video games, drugs, and even like religion and spirituality, just throwing yourselves excessively into something because you're avoiding feelings. So that's quite a long list, and there are more, but yeah.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So, if I may bring a question in at this time. So,
Sure.
A question was sent to us in advance a few weeks ago when we were going to discuss this, from Kripali Chavda, based in Nottingham, and she wanted to ask, she lost her dad about 18 months ago, and her mum has not really discussed it and not really spoken about her feelings, or even discussed it with the children. She is one of 3 children. She's the oldest, and she's got a younger sister and brother. She's constantly cleaning, which you've just mentioned, which made me think. And she's constantly cooking and cleaning. She doesn't call her own sisters or brothers anymore. She doesn't want to engage with anyone. I know we've not been able to go out as much, but she doesn't like going for walks anymore. Could she be still grieving for the loss of her dad?
Yeah, like, first of all, Kripali, if you're listening, like, my sincere condolences. And yeah, absolutely. It sounds like mum hasn't even started the grieving process. That, shock can live in the system for a very long time. And that's where we have that first stage of grief of kind of almost not denial, because she knows that it's happened, but the body can't process what's happened. And, Yeah, absolutely. So, you've got those symptoms of isolating and cutting yourself off from people, and that keeping busy of distracting yourself from your emotions. So yeah, no, absolutely. It sounds like this lady, Kripali's mum, is definitely not even started the grieving process. And there's no shame, there's no kind of a judgment there, because these emotions that rise when we experience loss are so painful, and we've never been taught and how to deal with them. What do we do with those really deep, it's almost physical pain when it comes to grief. And so no wonder we try to distract ourselves. It's, as humans, we're built so that we protect ourselves from any kind of pain. So it's very, very normal and natural to do that. But in order to stay emotionally healthy and be able to step back into life, it's really important that that grieving process is really gently encouraged as well.
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned like the denial stage and the grieving stage. So, am I right in thinking there's different stages then?
Well, so Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, this is a tricky one. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did a whole study about the 5 stages, and the 5 stages that she actually talked about was the 5 stages of dying. But what people have done is taken that model and kind of turned it into the 5 stages of death. But actually, it's been misinterpreted. So there are stages, if you like. So shock always comes after any kind of trauma. Doesn't matter what that loss is, it always comes after that. But then the journey can unfold very differently for people. There's no kind of set pattern, because everyone will grieve very differently. So some people may, intensely feel the grief. So for some people, there may be a delayed reaction. There's the stages of denial, and then bargaining and healing and moving through and all the rest of it. But I promise you, I've worked with hundreds of people, and having been through so much grief myself, there are no stages.
Yeah.
There are no stages. Everyone will do it very differently. And we must remember that, because as human beings, we never follow set patterns with our emotions. And it depends on what our past lives have been like. I mean, in this lifetime, like what your childhood has been like, what has been modeled to us by our parents and other significant community members and family members about how we deal with intense emotions. And I think, especially in our community, there is a real kind of fear, and there's judgment around emotions, especially painful ones. And we think that, we've got to be strong around this stuff. We hear that all the time, just be strong, because people don't know what to say to us.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of education, I think, that needs to be done.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, in our community especially, we don't really talk about emotional
Oh,
stuff.
no.
We don't really talk about what, the loss of someone, or yeah, you're right. We just told, oh, be strong. I don't know if it's almost seen as a sign of weakness if you're seen to be emotional, or dealing with your emotions, or admitting that actually I just need some time to deal with this or something. We're just told to get on with it.
Yeah, Bhavini is so right. Unfortunately, I do think, and I don't think it's just our community. I think it's generally humanity, those who aren't awakened emotionally, but definitely in our community. It's almost as if we are programmed to just get on with it straight away. And if people, for example, have any type of prolonged grief, especially for those who have lost loved ones during COVID, we haven't been able to grieve as a community or as a family as we normally would. And where do we go with those emotions, And it is seen, I think, unfortunately, as a sign of weakness to kind of go, well, aren't you over that yet? Like that's what happens in life. And then unfortunately, what happens after that is we bring in religious and spiritual truths to kind of say, you mustn't cry because the soul will be in despair, or, the soul won't transition properly. And then that makes the griever feel bad about feeling bad, and then makes them feel even more guilty. And so we've really got to approach this very differently, from a more compassionate way, and just know that it's really, really normal and natural to grieve. And it's actually healthy for us to grieve as well if we want to remain healthy going forward in our lives.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, you know, talking about this, you know, bringing this to the attention of the airwaves and to all our listeners, I think, you know, it's really a good opportunity to actually share those important messages. So, you know, really thank you for coming on. I mean, stay with us, Dipti. We've got our next track and, you know, let's continue the conversation. The next song is Tere Mast Mast Do Nain from the film The Bank.
ताकते रहते तुझको सांझ सवेरे नैनों में हाय नैनों में तुझको सांझ सवेरे नैनों में बसियां जैसे नैन ये तेरे नैनों में बसियां जैसे नैन ये तेरे तेरे मस्त मस्त दो नैन मेरे दिल का ले गए चैन मेरे दिल का ले गए चैन तेरे मस्त मस्त दो नैन पहल तुझे देखा तो दिल मेरा धड़का है धड़का धड़का है जल जल उठा हूँ मैं शोला जो प्यार का भड़का है भड़का भड़का है नींदों में घुल गए हैं सपने जो बदले से लग रहे हैं अंदाज मेरे बदले से लग रहे हैं अंदाज मेरे तेरे मस्त मस्त दो नैन मेरे दिल का ले गए चैन मेरे दिल का ले गए चैन तेरे मस्त मस्त दो नैन
से शुरू हुई तुझ पे ही खात्मा हो दुनिया मेरे दुनिया दुनिया मेरे ये बात दिल में थी नैनों ने बोल दी मैं हूँ तेरी मैं हूँ तेरी तुझको ही याद करके आहे भरूं मिलके भी मिल ना पाऊं अब क्या करूं मैं मिलके भी मिल ना पाऊं अब क्या करूं तेरे मस्त मस्त दो नैन मेरे दिल का ले गए चैन मेरे दिल का ले गए चैन तेरे मस्त मस्त दो नैन
ताकते रहते तुझको सांझ सवेरे नैनों में बसियां जैसे नैन ये तेरे नैनों में बसियां जैसे नैन ये तेरे तेरे मस्त मस्त दो नैन मेरे दिल का ले गए चैन मेरे दिल का ले गए चैन तेरे मस्त मस्त दो नैन
मेरे दिल
Mastonen from the film The Bang. You're listening to me, Bhavini Makwana, on BHF Radio, and Dipti Solanki, who has joined us this morning, and we are talking about grief. So just continuing the conversation, just going back a bit. So if someone who may be noticing someone in their friends or family or colleague who could be experiencing grief or thinks they may be, when would it be a good idea to kind of step in or maybe suggest some kind of support that could be available? Because sometimes, like, you know, I think people are reluctant to step in or maybe don't know what to say, so it's kind of just left and people are kind of left to deal with it on their own. I mean, what could you share in that kind of scenario?
Yeah. Okay. So I think initially it's really important, and I said this a moment ago before the song, is that, like, it's important for us to remember, number one, that any type of grief is a really, really normal, natural and healthy reaction. Okay. So tears, some people will cry, some people will not. Like, there is no normal way to grieve. But when you can clearly see that someone is struggling, our natural instinct is to feel like we need to fix them. Okay. We feel like we need to make them happy. We feel like we need to get them integrated into kind of life again very quickly. And that being the indicator that we've done the right thing and we fixed them. People who are grieving don't need to be fixed. Okay. It's a very, very normal place to be. But what they do need is a very compassionate ear. And, you know, I always say that people start to heal the moment they feel heard. Okay. So if you're sitting with a griever and they say, do you know what, I just can't believe they're gone, or I can't believe this has happened. It's really important that we reply with something like, no, I agree with you. How does it make you feel? Instead of, you know, because that's encouraging the conversation, that's opening it up and allowing them to speak out their feelings. But what normally tends to happen in society is, I just don't know what I'm going to do. Like, I can't believe this has happened. And then the reply will be, because we think we're being kind and we want to fix people, we will say things like, oh, but you know what, life goes on and we have to be strong, and that was God's will, and all of these things. And when we say things like that, however well-meaning they are, the other person will shut down immediately because they don't feel safe enough to share what they're actually feeling. Because yeah, it might have been God's will, and yes, these things do happen, but that doesn't help your heart that's absolutely broken at the moment. So really what we want to do is encourage people to say, you know, this is a very safe space for you. I will not share what you are telling me with anyone else. I will not make you feel judged. I will just sit here and listen to you. And, you know, like, I remember a few months ago when a friend of mine lost her dad and she wasn't capable of speaking and she didn't want to say anything. You can just go and sit and say, you don't have to talk. I just want you to know that I'm here. Yeah. And just sending text messages to people saying, like, you're in my thoughts, because we can feel isolated and we can feel so misunderstood. You know, Bhavini, you know, I lost my dad to COVID in January, and I cannot tell you the mixed reactions and that I experienced, but the most amazing thing that I found that helped me so much is, you know, immediately there are so many people around you, and there are people that will be messaging you, and there's a lot going on, there's a lot to be sorted out. But, you know, it's coming up to 6 months next week, and I deeply, deeply value the people that will message me and say, do you know, I'm thinking about you, like, how are you doing? You know, just to let you know that you're in my thoughts, because the griever won't want to deep and meaningful with everybody, but it will mean so much to them that you're in their thoughts, and, you know, that you're in their prayers, or whatever it is that you want to say. And practical things, you know, grievers, whatever their loss is, will struggle with practical things. You know, they won't feel like making meals for themselves. They won't want to do their washing. They won't want to do their cleaning. They won't feel able to. So just turning up with a meal, even a few months down the line, say, I made you something, you don't have to cook tonight, or, really practical things as well, so that they can get on with the business of just feeling into their emotions.
Yeah, I mean, that's great advice and sort of things that we can take away. And would you say kind of, would you say this is kind of similar to how children can be perceived? Like, I mean, what kind of examples can you share of how best to sort of approach the topic of grief, loss to children?
Yeah, so I think that when it comes to the loss of children as adults, we have a very powerful role to play in how we set the example, because this shouldn't really just come down to when we have experiences of loss. If the adults around children are able to just talk about emotions, okay, and make it, let's really normalize talking about our emotions. How did that make you feel? Was that uncomfortable? Does that make you feel sad? Without trying to fix them. And especially when a loss event happens. I know with my children are grown up now. So they're 21 and they're 17. But still, I know immediately after Dad died, we would check in with each other like every day in the evening. We made a point of sitting down saying, how's everyone doing? Like, how's everyone feeling? And it's asking those very direct questions, saying, are you feeling sad? There are lots of books. My younger nieces and nephews, I made sure I got them some really amazing books. And I know you're going to ask me what they're called, and I can't remember off the top of my head now, that address how we feel and how it's really normal to feel sad, and how it's important that we can somehow articulate these feelings as well. And it's not just, again, during bereavement, it's pet loss. It's when bullying happens at school. It's when something doesn't go the way they expect it to. If there are families that have that are kind of broken down or split up, or parents living separately. If one parent doesn't turn up, or there's a big change in family dynamic, it's having those conversations with our children. It's addressing it, and the very simple question of, how does that make you feel, is just so powerful. And then don't interrupt, because however painful it is for us to hear our children and what their emotions are, immediately as parents, we want to go in and fix them. But it's so much more powerful to just leave really natural pauses and say, well, how does that make you feel? Where do you feel it? Does it give you a tummy ache? That could be anxiety. Does it make you feel worried? When do you think about it? How do you feel when you're at school? Does it make you feel frightened? Does it make you worry about other things? And just leaving a really beautiful, comfortable pause so that they can think about it, and say, you don't have to answer now. Come back and tell me, if you're ever feeling sad and you don't want to talk about it, but have a sign, have a signal, so that the child can show you that I'm kind of struggling right now. I could just do with a hug. So it's creating that safety and intimacy around emotions as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And especially when lockdown hit and classes moved online, so the face-to-face interaction, meeting their friends, it was a massive change. And of course,
huge.
Next month, exams were different this year. So, people are going to be, certain students are going to get their results, and it's probably a mixed emotional time period for so many people, children, students of all ages, that are going to be going through different feelings, and just allowing that kind of space. And as parents, or not just parents, maybe aunties and uncles, or even grandparents, just like asking the simple question of, how did it make you feel, or how does it make you feel? So
I think children have missed out on so many important rites of passage through this time as well. And that needs to be acknowledged. They've not been able to kind of have their end of year kind of ceremonies that they do, their sports days, their all of these things. It's so important for them to kind of signify moving on to the next stage, and there's been no clear boundaries there. So I think a lot of children feel very lost at sea, and I know that most child therapists are full to the brim at the moment because kids are really, really experiencing a lot of anxiety and all different types of mental health issues.
Yeah, and it's I guess it's the nice sort of segue into asking the next question. We had another question come in from someone who wants to remain anonymous and just wanted to share that his mum lost her mum. So the guy that messaged, his nanny passed away,
Right.
and his mum doesn't talk about it. Like, you know, it's not even just his mom, the whole family, you know, they're not one for talking about feelings. And he often asks her, are you okay? And in his email, she's just acting like life continues and she doesn't talk about it. She's not stopped. She hasn't cried. She hasn't even asked the children how we're feeling. Is this normal?
Unfortunately, is normal. And I think it goes back to that point of emotions being so intense and especially that generation not knowing what to do with them. But I think there are certain questions that can be asked. You know, that generic question of, are you okay? Like, it's really simple to answer that and shut that person down. Yeah, of course I'm fine. I'm fine. And that when anyone says I'm fine, they're big red flags to me anyway. But I think, you know, changing the way that you ask the question, it's like, do you miss Nanima? Like, what do you miss about her?
Yeah.
You know that thing Nanima used to do, what was it that she said? And just gently, not forcing the issue, gently asking questions in a different way. And you know, just saying it's okay to talk about her, like, you know, you must miss her, or just saying, Mum, I really miss Nanima. Can you remind me of something? You know, gently probing, and always gently, never pressuring anyone to kind of say, you know, you must reveal your feelings, because these feelings are big and they're frightening, and they can, you know, physically they hurt. So, you know, and it is very normal because we've never been taught, and as you kind of touched on, you know, it's seen as a sign of weakness. And for many people, I think there's always the fear that if I do open up about this, what will it feel like? What will it look like? And also, what will other people think? Because we are so frightened of that judgment as well. And normally, you know, Bhavini, it's not normally only the last loss that happened. So while this lady has lost her mum, there's probably lots, if that's her way of coping with emotion or not coping with emotion, there's going to be so many other losses underneath that are building up the pressure. And then it just becomes really overwhelming. So it kind of becomes easier just to park it completely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Dipti, thank you so much for coming on. And, you
Ah.
know, you're a grief coach. I mean, can you quickly share what is a grief coach and how can people get in touch with you?
Okay, so what I have done is I've devised a system where we're not just talking about feelings. I give people tools and strategies of how to work through what their different losses are. And people can find me on diptisolanki.com. I'm on Facebook, Dipti Solanki Homeopathy and Coaching, and also on Instagram, Dipti Grief Coach Homeopath.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds really good. And with the, you know, in your experience of doing this line of work, do you think we're getting better as a society in talking about our emotions and feelings and, of course, grief? Or do you think there's still a lot of kind of awareness to be had?
Well, I think the wonderful people like you who are encouraging these conversations goes a long way towards starting that work. But I think you, like me, will agree that together there's a lot more that we can do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on BHF
You're welcome.
Radio.
Thank you for having me on, Bhavini.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, Dipti.
Take care.
Well, that's the amazing Dipti Solanki, a grief coach. And, you know, if you want to follow up on anything, you know, please do follow her on social media. And, you know, I'm sure she'll be more than happy. You know, she shares lots of information and tips. But if you're actually looking for any signposting resources, and we'll get information on those books. And when we share the recording to this show, we'll share various resources that could support you. Well, thank you for tuning in to me today, and we'll be back next Saturday with a different topic. And until then, keep safe. I know the announcements of the restrictions easing are coming, and we're closer to the date, but still be mindful, keep safe, be cautious and keep safe. So until then, a goodbye from me, and
A goodbye from me.
we're gonna leave you with our final song, which is
Naino Me Sapna from the film Himatwala.
Bye.
नैनों में सपना, सपनों में सजना, सजना पे दिल आ गया, क्यों सजना पे दिल आ गया। नैनों में सपना, सपनों में सजना, सजना पे दिल आ गया, क्यों सजना पे दिल आ गया।
कहीं अलबेले देखे जवानी के रेले देखे हसीनों के मेले देखे दिल पे हो तू ही छा गया तू ही छा गया। अरे नैनों में सपना सपनों में सजनी सजनी पे दिल आ गया ये सजनी पे दिल आ गया।
ना मिला कोई भी तुझसा, मैंने देखी हर गली, मैंने छोड़ा जमाना सारा, मैं तेरे संग चली।
तन तेरा खिला खिला चमन तू जवानी की कली तेरी खुशबू ही मेरी सांसों में पल पल है पली। बाहों का सहारा मिला तेरा जो इशारा मिला मुझे जग सारा मिला मैं तो हो तुझे पा गया तुझे पा गया।
नैनों में सपना, सपनों में सजना, सजना पे दिल आ गया, क्यों सजना पे दिल आ गया। सुन जरा नाड़ी सुन जरा, कहे क्या मेरी चूड़ियां, नागिन बन बन के डसती है मुझको अब ये दूरियां।
दूरियां ये मजबूरियां है बस कुछ ही साल की लेके आऊंगा तेरे